Well, I'm really excited to share with you this morning on this presentation called Talking Jesus. Back in February, I went along to a Wight church's evening at Christ the King College, where Rachel Jordan Wolfe, who's the CEO of Hope Together, they wrote this report. She delivered this presentation. And as you can see there, it's about what people think in the UK of Jesus, Christians, and evangelism. And I'll be honest, it was Friday evening. I could have stayed at home on the sofa. It was a bit cold and dark outside. Didn't want to go and hang out with these other weird Christians, some other churches across the island. That's a joke, by the way. But I went and I was really inspired. I thought it was brilliant. And there was a few of you here that were at that event, but there was quite a lot of you that weren't. So I came to the team and I said, you know what? I've been really inspired by this. I'd like to share it with the church. I think it's worth them hearing about it. So that's why I'm here now doing this. So yeah, this report is based on some research that they carried out. And so I'm using some of their slides. There isn't time to go through the whole report this morning because I'm trying to keep this, you'll be pleased to know, so around half an hour. But what I want to do is just briefly mention about how this research was conducted. Because if this research is incorrect or been really badly put together, I'd be wasting your time this morning telling you all these things that they found out. So what they did, they surveyed 4,000 adults across the UK, basically 3,000-ish UK adults across the country with a boost sample of what they call practicing Christians, so that anything in this survey that's meant to represent practicing Christians is meant to be accurate. But what's important about this is this 1.54% margin of error. And I promise it's not all statistics and percentages this morning, but the point of that is if this is inaccurate by 1.5%, that's not a very bad sort of margin to be out of. So hopefully what we're hearing about this morning is actually fairly accurate and worthwhile sharing. So the first part of this report is called State of Faith in the UK. And I want to bring you back to November last year when the census was just coming out. And you might remember some of these headlines. They were a little bit doom and gloom, you could say. Christianity plunges in UK, as census shows. Fewer than half follow our national religion. Less than half of England and Wales represented as Christian. It was a little bit, maybe a little bit doom and gloom. The media, all we're trying to tell us is Christianity is plunging. Now, the truth is, that headline was correct. 48% currently in the UK at the last census representing themselves there as Christian. Now, you could look at it another way. There's 52% of the population that need to hear about Jesus. But more specifically here, 26%, I've got a laser here, wow. 26% of the population actually went with none of the above. So they didn't actually define themselves as anything. And if you don't know what an agnostic or an atheist is, I'll just give you those definitions. An atheist is a person who does not believe in the existence of God or gods. And an agnostic is someone who doesn't believe it's possible to know for sure that a God exists. But that's the spread that we're looking at. 48% Christian, a few other religions in there that we're aware of, but a large percentage of people there not really sure what they actually believe. But there is an important caveat to this 48%. If 48% of the population choose to associate themselves as a Christian with the Christian faith, how many of them can we actually describe as practicing Christians? Now, how we're defining a practicing Christian is someone that would come to church once a month, at least once a month, and pray and read the Bible regularly. So probably the majority of you guys in here will be classed as practicing Christians. Hallelujah. Thank you. It's good to know that the pastor is praying, reading the Bible, and here once a month at least. So how many people are practicing Christians? Now, in this survey, it's 6%. You might think that's quite low, but that's 6% committed of the entire population. So if we've got 67 million people in the country, you could argue that's about 4 million committed, active, practicing Christians. And that hasn't actually changed much in the last 7 years. So they did this survey in 2015. And in that time, obviously, you could argue that some people would say there's an aging population, maybe, of Christians in the country. If that statistic has not really changed in 7 years, then the number of practicing Christians is stable. We must have new practicing Christians entering in as our amazing aging practicing Christians go to be with the Lord. So I hope you agree that's encouraging. There's a good percentage there of practicing Christians that are actually active and doing stuff. So now we're going to have a quick look at how people describe Jesus, because this is interesting to get perhaps the perspective of the population. How do they actually see Jesus? So if we look up here under how people describe Jesus, 20% of the population believe that God in human form who lived among the people in the first century. That's pretty good, 20%. 25% think normal human being, 33% a prophet or spiritual leader but not God. Well, there's some good starting points here. If we've got a third of the population that is actually acknowledging that Jesus might be a prophet or spiritual leader, or 20% actually saying, yes, Jesus is God in human form and lived among the people, I'm hoping you're getting the sense here that actually there might be some good starting points here for some conversations. That is, I hope you agree, more encouraging than the idea that Christianity is just plunging, that actually if people have this view of Jesus, then there's something maybe here that's actually open for discussion. Similar to this question here, was Jesus a historical person? 54% there. Jesus was a real human being. That's more than half the population in this survey looking to acknowledge that Jesus was a real human being. So there's a 50-50 chance here that if you strike up a conversation with someone about Jesus, that they'll actually accept that Jesus was a real human being. But there is a little bit of a challenge here. This percentage has dropped a little bit since they did this survey in 2015 from 61%. So the church does have this challenge to spread this message about Jesus being a real human being and that we do believe in him. But there's another theme that runs through this report as well, and that's about the 18 to 24 age bracket, where only 49% of them are believing in Jesus. So we've got people here that we do want to reach out and think about. Now, they asked people in this survey as well to tick from a list of attributes about how they describe Jesus. And again, this is looking at the population of the country. And the results are actually really good. We've got 43% spiritual, 39% peaceful, 38% leader, 37% loving. You know, these are positive traits that people have this positive view of Jesus. And I think that's encouraging. We should be encouraged that the population has a positive view of Jesus. The top trait, actually, for practicing Christians, those people that are coming to church, reading the Bible, theirs was loving at 76%. So the difference in knowing Jesus personally, Christians know that they're loved. And I think that's important to recognise. Easter's coming up in a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. And the key part of that is the resurrection. So this survey also asks, what percentage of people believe in the resurrection of Jesus? What do we think? I'm just going to have a sip. You might be surprised. If we combine these together, we've got 16% here of people that believe the resurrection of Jesus from the dead happened word for word as described in the Bible, and we've got 29% who believe it happened, but perhaps they don't agree with exactly some of the content in the Bible. But you put those two together and you get 45% of people that more or less believe in the resurrection of Jesus, even if they don't quite believe word for word what's in the Bible. 45%, or to look at it another way, 41% in the population categorically don't believe. So this means that 59% believe or they aren't sure in the resurrection of Jesus. There's a talking point for a conversation that you can have if, people are actually got some belief here that the resurrection did actually happen. So I bring you back to these headlines that we saw earlier on, doom and gloom, Christianity plunging. And then I came up with some of my own. You don't see these in the media. 45% of people believe in the resurrection. Number of practicing Christians is healthy and maintaining its levels across all ages. Population has a largely positive view of Jesus as a person. More than half of the population believe Jesus was a real historical person. And 20% of the population believe that Jesus is God. We're not hearing those in the media. We're being encouraged to say, when I went to this presentation, perhaps take out this little voice that's saying Christianity is dying and nobody wants to know, and look at what this survey is saying. We move on to this next part of this report, those outside the church. So this looks a bit more into those people outside the church, and actually it looked at where non-Christians go to get their answers on the Christian faith. So obviously this is interesting if we understand where people are looking for answers. So where do you go if you have a question that you want an answer to? Thank you very much. Google, yes, was the top hit here. It's absolutely true. There's 26% of people looking to Google to find out answers to the Christian faith. 22% reading the Bible and 22% coming to church. So if you're here for the first time this morning, you're very welcome. I hope you're enjoying these statistics. 15% talking to a family or friends who they know is a Christian, and 9% talking to a colleague or an acquaintance they know is a Christian. So, yeah, by looking at this, we can understand a little bit about where people are going. Obviously, if they're looking to Google, that's one of the reasons why we should be sort of, I guess, trying to make sure we're getting some of this stuff online. But let's also just look at the percentage of non-Christians who know a practicing Christian, because this is quite important as well. Here we have 53% of non-Christians who know a practicing Christian. So this is really important, because this is about, obviously, links outside of the church. We just saw from some of that previous data, and we'll see coming up, that people's connection personally with a practicing Christian is a good way of them coming to faith or perhaps being invited to church. So there's 53% here of non-Christians. Now that did drop a little bit since they last did this survey, but with the pandemic and with COVID and with shielding, that possibly has something to do with it. But it's an important reminder that we do need to keep links outside of the church. If you don't know any non-Christians, then potentially you have no way of, spreading your faith. So let's have a look on that point then of how they actually know us, as I've said. So 31% know practicing Christians through family, 35% friend, 12% acquaintance, 11% workmate, 8% neighbour. And you might see down here, 2% church leader. If you think Mike Connolly is the sole person who is going to have to do all the evangelism, then I'm afraid, according to this information, you're mistaken. That's not we saw Mike bring someone to the Lord, I think Steve up the other week. But what we've got to see here is it's personal evangelism of individuals through family, friends, and acquaintances. We can't just rely on the pastor to do the work of evangelism. Church body is spread across all these different areas through different workplaces, schools, hobbies, and friendship groups. So let's move on from that just to have a quick look at the public perception of Christians. So words used by non-Christians to describe Christians they know. Perhaps you can turn to your neighbour quickly for me, or audience interaction, and see if you can come up with a couple of words that non-Christians might use to describe Christians that they know. What was your word? Damn pots. Well, is that a Scottish one? Nut job, okay. Right. Hopefully you've come up with some possible words. I'm going to show you what the survey came up with. It's actually really positive. Caring, friendly, encouraging, hopeful. This is a list of words that I use to describe myself, along with the word humble. That's a joke, yeah. Let's get the joke, the punchline at the end there. We've gone too far. There's a really positive view here of Christians. Caring, friendly, encouraging, hopeful, good-humoured, generous, authentic. Yeah, there's a little bit of not so good things at the bottom, but the bulk here here is a very positive view. There's an overwhelmingly positive view here that non-Christians have of Christians. I'm sorry to bring a little bit of bad news. Words used to describe the Christian church. Now, sadly, this one isn't quite as positive. There is a slightly more negative view of the church. There's some hypocritical, narrow-minded sort of mixed in here. And you do have to remember that there is some historic abuse in certain denominations of the church that may sort of affect a non-Christian view of the church. But there is still positive views in here. Caring, friendly, encouraging, and hopeful is still there. But what is interesting about this, if the view of Christians is really positive, and the view of the church perhaps a little bit not so much, then the bridge is between the person. It's the personal evangelism. If the positive view is of me as a Christian, then it's me that's going to obviously have to use that to invite someone into church. But it's worth pointing out, actually, that when you ask non-practicing Christians what they think of the church, the people that actually come here and know us, 47% of them think the church is friendly, and only 12% think the church is hypocritical or narrow-minded. So what that's actually telling us is the closer people get to Christian faith, the more positive view perhaps they have of the church. People on the street outside don't have a clue what goes on in here unless they watch us online. Hello. But until you actually get in here and experience it, perhaps that is when you will see some of the more positive stuff taking place. So let's move on to part 3, conversations about Jesus. So this is the area of the report that looked into people actually talking about Jesus. And I don't have time to go through this whole section, but has the Christian that you know ever talked to you about their faith in Jesus? This is perhaps both positive and challenging. 55% there. 55% of non-Christians who know a practicing Christian have had a conversation with that person about their faith. So that's great because that means there's practicing Christians talking about their faith, but that means that not all of us are doing it. And I'm not standing up here today and saying, hey, I'm great at this. I have a story to tell you later. But there is obviously more room here for obviously practicing Christians to be sharing their faith. Because there's another really positive statistic here. 1 in 3 non-Christians, after a conversation with a Christian, want to know more about Jesus Christ. We know that not every conversation we're going to have is necessarily going to immediately bring someone to faith. Otherwise, this room would be bursting this morning with people queuing out the door. But it's an encouraging statistic nonetheless. If you perhaps have the idea in your head, again, that nobody wants to know and that perhaps you're going to have 10 conversations and only one person is going to be interested, statistically, what this is saying is that actually 1 in 3 would want to know more about Jesus Christ after having a conversation. I hope that's encouraging. There's more on this section in this report. I'll mention it at the end, and it's online. Which now, there goes the water. Well. How people come to faith. So this is interesting as well. So this is another key bit of research they did to find out about how practicing Christians came to faith. So this helps us to understand, if we know how people come to faith, then we can be looking at what we can do to support that. So I'm going to do a quick show of hands, a quick straw poll. Could you put your hand up for me if you grew up in a Christian family? A few hands across the room. Could you put your hand up for me if you decide to become a Christian after reading the Bible? A couple. And could you put your hand up if you became a Christian after coming along to church for a period of time? Okay, good. So that backs up a little bit here of what we're looking at. The top percentage, the top way that practicing Christians, these committed Christians, come to faith is growing up in a Christian family. So that's 34%, consistently the greatest influence across all the generations, and it shows us how important it is to disciple children and young people and families. We've got 24% there reading the Bible, and as I said, 19% attending a church service. physical church service, or a Sunday school. But there's lots of other things in the mix here as well. We've got spiritual experiences, we've got conversations with Christians you know, life events. This goes on as well. Tending church school, visiting youth clubs, Christian media, conversations with Christians. There's quite a lot of different things here, all the way down to the bottom here, where we actually get into some of the more modern areas as well. So actually, when we get down here, you'll see some of these percentages here for Christian media and Christian content shared on social media. These things didn't really play a part a few years ago, and now they're actually part of these statistics. And I talked about this 18 to 24 age bracket, which perhaps are the ones where, that need that little bit of reaching out, where they don't really know what they believe. Well, actually, of those, 9% of 18 to 24s were influenced by online church, 8% of that 18 to 24 by TV, radio, and websites, and 8% of 18 to 24-year-olds by social media shared by people that they know. So when they last did this survey, this modern media, social media, that barely registered 1%. Perhaps that's why this church is proud as well to be live streaming our services online. We have a presence online to reach people that might not otherwise come into church. You might have seen, if you follow us on Instagram or YouTube, that we started posting little reels, short little video clips of our talks. And actually a friend of mine in the pub said the other week, I was on your social media and I saw this clip of this person speaking, and that was interesting. So, there are things that we're doing in our digital strategy as a church to try and grow that area, as this is an area that is growing and reaching people. Finally, in this section, the top influences that helped over 18s come to faith. So we're not looking at children now. These are, funnily enough here, with adults, it's a life event, which is one of the biggest things perhaps that can bring them to faith. Now, whether that is a death or near-death experience or something else, but life events are quite a big thing influencing people to come to faith, looking for answers. Christian families up there, attending a physical church service, a few other things. So I'm hoping you get the sense that if we know some of this information, it's very useful. It can perhaps influence how we approach bringing people to faith. So my final slide from this research is about not underestimating the early years. So this is the ages at which practicing Christians came to faith. And by and large, you can see how important this 0 to 18 is. Now, there's still very much encouraging, you don't get to 18 and that's it. There's still percentages here going through all the ages. But the message here is not to underestimate the early years. And it's perhaps one of the reasons why True Vine Church is proud to support the work that Youth for Christ does on the island, because they are reaching these really important ages where people are genuinely coming to faith. So, I want to conclude a little bit on this research then. It's telling us that there's people who really want to find out more about Jesus and encounter him for themselves. And this means that now is a great time for personal evangelism and invitation to reach out to our nation with the love and message of Jesus. And this research, this isn't meant to be a doom and gloom presentation this morning. There's lots of really positive stuff in here about the view of Jesus. And it does show us that there are practicing Christians doing really great stuff. So I hope you're encouraged looking at some of that information and survey there. We need to shake off this idea that nobody wants to know about Jesus. That's certainly how I might have felt, especially looking at some of the headlines that we try to hear. We want to shake off this idea that nobody wants to know, that no one's interested. And actually, people are open to having a conversation about Jesus. I want to tell you a quick story about how I approach this. I knew I couldn't come and stand up here and say we should be talking about Jesus and not have something to actually to tell you. So there's something clever that I did that you can do too. I said to this friend of mine, who we'll call John for the purposes of this talk, I'm doing this talk at church about talking Jesus. Tell me what you think, of some of these questions. And in the same way that you can go away and say, oh, there was this guy at church today talking about this report. What do you think about this? So anyway, we were in the pub up the road, and I was thinking, oh, I'm going to have to ask him. I can't, I need to do this. So I said to him, oh, mate, I'm doing this talk. Can you just tell me, where would you put yourself in this list of religions? Oh, I'd call myself a Christian. What? Yeah, I was baptized Roman Catholic. Oh, okay. I didn't know that. That's interesting. Oh, okay. In that case, mate, can you tell me, what do you believe in the resurrection of Jesus? What do you think here? Oh, yeah, no, I believe in the resurrection of Jesus. He went for the one where he sort of said, oh, maybe not every single bit in the Bible. But I'm like, what? Hang on a minute. This guy that I've known for ages and that I'm sort of like a bit worried about, he's now telling me he's a Christian. And actually, we're running an event. Well, not we. Wight churches are running an event here in April, a Living Waters music night. It's opened to people to come and basically to bring your non-Christian friends. It's not going to be too Jesus-y. It's a music concert. There's a guy called Phil Knox from OM going to come and do some spoken word. I'm going to invite him to that. I know from having this conversation, just kind of saying, oh, where do you fit in here, that he's calling himself a Christian. Well, that to me is a brilliant opportunity now for me to invite him to that event and say, well, in that case, come along to this, because I now know. So I encourage you, if you really don't know how to approach this, say to someone, there's this guy at church talking. Was he talking absolute rubbish? Can I discuss this with you and see what you think about some of these questions? So here's some things you could do. Praying for friends and family members to find faith. And this is an important one. If you don't know enough non-Christians to actually share this, then maybe you need to go and make some new friends. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to actually reach anybody. Listen and talk with your friends or colleagues or acquaintances if you're able to do that. And I know there's some workplaces where that is not as easy or maybe not even allowed. But you're looking to find that third that are open to know more about Jesus. You can invite them to church, online or in person. We've got our Easter family service coming up in a couple of weeks' time. That's a really good opportunity to bring people into a slightly more relaxed church environment, especially at Easter, one of those key times that people might actually want to, if they're in that non-practicing Christian bracket, they may well want to come into the church for Easter Sunday. Maybe give them an accessible copy of the life events of Jesus. Now, at the risk of becoming a hope salesman, they do these really cool sort of printed copies of Luke and Mark's Gospel. You can buy these for a couple of quid. If people are interested, we can buy them in bulk. But these are really nicely illustrated versions of the Gospel, which you can give to a non-Christian friend rather than handing them a big leather-bound Bible. You can give them that and encourage them to have a read. And finally, we do bang on about it in this church, and I hope you can see why from how people are coming to faith at that age. Volunteering to help support children or youth work is really important. We're always asking for more volunteers. You can see why that's important. You might have heard YFC are running a new Rock Solid Club in Newport. Again, something that needs support. So if you're encouraged by that, then that could be an area that needs help. We know how important those years are. I have this scripture as well from Romans, so I thought it'd be good just to slip a little bit of the Bible in here at the end. That's a joke. But anyway, how then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring the good news. I hope you're getting the context of that there. How can they call upon the one they've not believed in? How can they believe in the one whom they've not heard? So to conclude, I'm just going to flash up some of these things just to remind you, just to encourage you. 20% of the population believe that Jesus is God. 54% believe that Jesus is a real historical person. 45% believe in the resurrection, more or less, just that little bit of maybe they don't quite believe something in the word exactly. Non-Christians are most likely to turn to Google, reading the Bible, going to a local church, or talking to a friend or family member who they know is a Christian to find out more about the Christian faith. 55% of non-Christians who know a practicing Christian have had a conversation with them about their Christian faith. And 33% of non-Christians have had a conversation with a Christian and are open to talking more about Jesus. And 34% of practicing Christians say that growing up in a Christian family was a top influence in bringing them to faith. So as I say, this report, I did not conduct this research myself. That would have taken too long. You can find this report online, talkingjesus.org. The whole thing's on there. You can download the whole report. You can get physical copies online if you're interested. I hope you found that encouraging. Rachel Jordan Wolfe, who authored this report, said, encourage you to take out this earpiece that says Christianity's dying and nobody wants to know, and actually take on board some of this here, which I think is very encouraging. Thank you for listening.